Hello and welcome, and I'm very proud to be showing you today the new release from Fluffy Audio called Dominus Choir Pro. What you've just heard there is the Dominus Choir Pro Legato patch, which is actually quite similar to the original Dominus Choir Legato patch with a few little tweaks and some additional vowels, and there are a couple of reviews you can find on that library elsewhere. But we're going to focus today on the new features of Dominus Choir Pro and what Fluffy Audio have pulled out to be able to make this new and exciting release so much more interesting and better than their previous choir. You can get Dominus Choir Pro as an upgrade if you're an existing Dominus Choir user, or you can buy it as a whole new library and get all the features of both libraries in one. So what is Dominus Choir Pro and why am I so excited about it? Well, Dominus Choir Pro is quite simply a super upgrade boost to the original choir. I really love the original choir, the fact you can use phrases and you can build up sentences and then have them sung in beautiful timed and tempo synced legato phrasing. The new version of Dominus Choir Pro allows you also to add a Marcato and a Staccato phrasing into your mix, which allows you to create much more dynamic and also much more interesting phrases to expand your musical genre. So just to remind you, if you haven't already seen Dominus Choir, the legato patch, which you can see on the screen in front of you, consists of a left panel in which you can place all of your key switches, which essentially select different phrases. And on the right-hand side of the Kontakt screen, you can choose the balance of male to female choir. You can see the vowels being built in real time as the flow goes across. You can look at the dynamics, and you can see here I'm using the modulation lever to go between piano and forte. You can also choose the quantizing of your notes and how they quantize with the host sequencer, so you can get your timings exactly right. You can switch between polyphonic and monophonic mode. You've also got a release/legato slider, and this controls the overlap between the different words and phrases. You can also lock the velocity to avoid any velocity glitches while you're trying to play subtle phrases. And then the really super feature, which I showed you in that little demo at the start, is you can change the way your keyboard responds. And I'll just demonstrate this now using the OO sound selected here. If you choose overlap and you play a single note, you'll notice there that we had the males in the male register, but then when I went over to the female register, you heard the female singing an octave higher. Well, actually what's happening is the male and female choirs are overlapped and are sharing keys. So if you play a polyphonic phrase, you're getting the chord being played or sung by the male choir sound, and on top of that, you're getting the female choir sound singing the same tone or phrase, but often an octave above, because that's the way that the female vocal works over the male vocal. So if I just play a chord of F minor, and then go up to the second inversion, and then resolve that, you can hear that you've got this lovely kind of angelic soaring female vocal over the top. But that's not always suitable. Sometimes you might want to have the male and female sections separate, in which case you can use the spaced option. The spaced option allows the full male range to occur in the bottom half of the keyboard, and then the full female range to occur in the top half of the keyboard, with the central octave overlapping. So where the males tail out at the top of the tenor end, then the altos come in at the bottom of the alto end and they overlap. So if I just play some bass, you can hear how those two octaves here are both the tenors and the altos singing in unison, but on the keyboard it's an octave apart. And then above the altos, we get the sopranos coming in. So that's the spaced, and of course you can imagine what real notes means. Real notes means that the actual notes that you're playing are the actual notes sung by the choir, and you will know that the tenors and the altos will overlap by some degree, and then this is reflected in the playing. So if I start with the bass and work up through the tenors and altos and into the sopranos, you'll hear at some points the tenors and the altos are singing in unison. These three layouts are really useful. Quite often you just want some choir making a nice choral sound behind your orchestral or electronic music track, in which case you can just choose the overlap mode and just hit keys and you get that lovely choir sound. But if you actually want to notate your score in a way that follows the soprano, alto, tenor, bass, or a three-part choir or whatever, if you choose the real notes or the spaced, you can then get those choral parts working really well together. In monophonic mode, you still get the same divisions of notes, but now in monophonic mode you can only play one key and you'll get legato phrasing between each key. So if I just choose the U again, you can hear the phrasing, and if I change that to crucifixus, for instance, and play the same kind of legato phrasing between the male sections, and if you were to open up, of course, 4 copies of Dominus Choir Pro Legato and set all of the phrases the same, you could then create a full SATB arrangement using monophonic choir parts, which is phenomenal. I mean, it's a unique feature of this library which makes it absolutely amazing to use in arrangements. So that is the legato phrase. Under the bonnet are some other bits and bobs. For instance, you've got the mix window, which is on the right hand side here, and you can see you've got a choice of 4 mic positions: spot, close, mid and far, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time looking and listening to those when I look at the Marcato and Staccato patches. You've also got the option to change the choir balance between male and female, and some other options. And then right down the bottom you've got the choice of the reverb. We've got chosen here large chamber, and down the bottom little slider there just gives you the balance between dry and wet for the use of that reverb. These are all non-algorithmic reverbs. They're using the reflection engine built in within Kontakt, and they allow the predetermined reverb styles. You can see we've got things from concert hall, large chambers, caves, all which have been selected by Fluffy Audio to really fit the sound of this choir. So if you're used to using your own either algorithmic reverb or your own reverb modeling, you can obviously turn that off completely by sliding the slider to the far left and apply your own reverb to your choirs. And the image on the right is just for visual purposes, to have a little look and see what the reverb tail looks like. So that's the mix window. You can then move on to the word edit window. This is where the magic happens, and you can see listed there are a selection of tones that you can select from, and above the list of the tones you can see a list of note lengths. So just to recap how you create sounds, you can click on the little plus button on the left hand side and create an empty bank, and this is going to be in this case is C-2, but if I click on this little drop down box I can select another key, and I've chosen F0 as my selector for this one. And then I can start building a phrase. You see the phrases or the tones on the screen. This is now F0 when I want to select it. And then I can start creating my phrases by choosing the syllables and sounds, vowels, etc. So we can just do Gloria, nice and simple here. We can choose Glor, and then we look down the list until we find Glory, and there's Glory, and you want to finish with Ya, so you finish in Ya. So now we've got Gloria. You can see also there are note lengths associated with each of these sounds, and as on the screen it shows Gloria are both showing semibreves, and if I play a chord now, it plays the Gloria in strict time according to the tempo of the host sequencer. And yet you can change these. If I want the re to be extra short, I just click on the little tone underneath the re, and I can choose a shorter note. So I'm going to choose a quarter note, and now we'll see that reflected when I play. which is really nice. You'll notice the last note always sustains while you hold it. That just makes phrasing a lot easier to play. So you could change the R to a 16th note. And you'll see there you get this little glitch because it's trying to play the ya as a 16th note and then sustain it. So the best thing to do is leave your end note a little bit longer to allow you to sustain it. But it's an amazing system. You can just fiddle with it. I mean, I can change that to an 8th now, and you can play that. And it's exquisitely smooth in its playback. I don't know how they've done this. It's a very clever bit of programming. But you can imagine now that I could actually create a new Gloria. So I could go back to Gloria again, and I could make a new one that goes Gloria. And I can now change this glory to a whole note, so a whole bar. And I could then select this as being F sharp 0. And I could switch between the two using these two keys, and therefore play the phrase Gloria in two different tempo phrasings. So the first one. And it copes very well. I've not got a click in my ear, so I'm not hearing the tempo particularly well in my head. But you can see there when you change the chord or change the notes, the singing follows you, which is really quite useful. So that's the simple legato phrasing in the Legato engine, which I think is beautiful. It's obviously been around since Dominus Choir was released. So let's move away from the legato, and we'll move on to the Marcato. Now, the Marcato engine is laid out in a very similar way to the Legato engine. This is very handy because once you're used to using one, you can easily adapt to use the other one. But on this engine, there's a few subtle variations which are worth thinking about. But I'll just give you an example of how this performs. If you're used to the Legato engine, you're used to the way that the tempo is fixed. You have to select how many beats or subbeats you want each of your vowels or sounds to make. Well, in the Legato and the Marcato, you have a different choice. In the Marcato, you don't have to set how long you want each note to be. In this case, you can just play a note and it'll carry on playing that sound until you release the key and move on to the next key. So you can see here I've selected D0 as my key switch, which is the I love you phrase, cunningly made. And you can see that the I is one word, the love is another word, and the you is a third word. And if I play one chord, that was the I. Now I play the second chord. And you can hear there it's built the phrase up from 3 separate notes. So each of those individual words is triggered by a key release and then the next key. So you can hold keys and morph between 2 chords while sustaining the first. So we'll do the I and we'll move to a second chord. Allows you to play that as a phrase. So you can see already that the Marcato engine has a little bit more power to it, a slightly different tone, and allows you, of course, to use your dynamics of your mod wheel in this case to program in between piano and forte. And if I just play that same phrase again, ranging up from piano to forte, you'll hear the dynamic range of this particular part of the choir. So you've got a really good dynamic range, which is just fantastic. You can continue adding words or phrases down the left-hand side, and if you click on a new one, for instance, we're just going to add one now, click down here and select the next, which in this case will be an F0. We can then go to our word edit window. You'll notice in the Marcato and in the Staccato engine that there are less words to choose from. This is not unintentional. I've had a little discussion with the people who made this to try and work out their motivation behind this. And because this is a Marcato, it's kind of a more of a shouty, in-your-face, big choir sound compared to the rather subtle legato phrasing. They've worked out that if you want to make a pert noise, it doesn't really matter if you use the pert or the d, it sounds pretty much the same. So they've tried to only use the vowels and the consonants that are needed to make standard phrases rather than including every single option. That would have taken months of recording and be a nightmare to program. So you'll see here there are ways of making pretty much every phrase, and I'm slowly plodding through this trying to work out how to make some of my favorite phrases. But for instance, with the E0 selection here, which is Imperium, the actual phrasing used is Imperium, but you can't really tell the difference when you play it. So I'm just going to play a simple G major chord. So Imperium sounds pretty much like Imperium when you're not focusing too hard on it. So that's quite a nifty little trick they've done to include more phrasing possibilities. Of course, you may want to say Imperium, God knows what it means, but there we are, you could use that phrase if you really wanted to. Of course, if you want to just get your choir to scream and shout in vowels, you'll notice that all the vowels are available to you. So here's an O sound, and I can just go O, and then just play an O. And it just plays O. So you don't have to muck around with complicated words if you just want to program in vowels. It's a bit of a waste for this library just to do vowels, but you can do it if you want to, because sometimes that's all you need. So the Marcato gives you that extra bit of power. In the engine window, you've also got some pre-roll latency controls down the bottom and your syllable speed down the bottom. So let's go back to the I love you and put the pre-roll latency all the way to the left, so get rid of that completely. Basically, the I sound will then reduce to a I, a really harsh attack. So if I play the I love you bit, you'll hear that right now. I love you. Sounds a little bit harsh on the attack. If you push the pre-roll latency all the way to the right-hand side, it will play the pre-roll into each of those recordings and give you the nice smooth attack of the choir. Of course, there is now a latency induced into this system, so you'd have to use some kind of latency compensation in your DAW, so just drag the sound a few milliseconds backwards to make it cope. But to be honest, for real-time performance, if you just have this somewhere set about there, it seems to be a good compromise between the hard attack that you need, but also the controllability of the tone. Underneath you have the syllable speed, and if you move the syllable speed to the left, I love you. And then the right, I love you. You'll notice when the syllable speed is fully to the left, it's a little bit more slow and controlled, and when it's fully to the right, words cut off a lot quicker. They go I as opposed to I, and that's just the way they've used that system. If you want to play a lot quicker, you may need to increase your syllable speed in order to get all of the syllables in while you're playing at high speed. Underneath, you've also got controls over dynamics. You've got control either with velocity or the mod wheel. Velocity is great if you're used to using velocity controlled instruments. A lot of VIs use velocity as a controller for dynamics, and this allows you to hit quietly for P and harder for MFs and Fs. I don't like bashing my keyboard like that, so I tend to use mod wheel, and using the mod wheel means that CC1 or the mod wheel now allows you to control your dynamics between P and F. Of course, the advantage of using mod wheel is you can do crescendos, etc. between phrases and within phrases. If you're just using velocity control, you're stuck. Once you've hit the note, that's it. You have to use a different dynamic control, and of course you won't be controlling the inherent dynamics of the recording, you'll just be changing the volume, for instance. So I like to leave it on mod wheel, but that's your choice. You've also got a control here over the 3 different keyboard layouts described before. Now let's move into the mix section. And for this, I'm going to leave myself on the I love you because I think that's quite sweet, and I'm going to look at the 4 different mic positions. And to do this, I'm going to first turn off the internal reverb, because that would mean I'd not get any interruptions from the reverb built into the engine. So let's first of all just hear the mid on its own as it's recorded. So this is a mid mic halfway down the hallway when they did the recordings, and you'll see that, or you'll hear that there is some inherent ambience in this recording. It's not hugely wet, but there is a tail on there, which is nice then, because you can add a bit of reverb and add to that tail. So that's the mid mics. If I then just choose the far mics, and I can just turn off the mid mics and have only the far mics loaded, just lift their gain up a little bit, and you'll see what happens because it's Kontakt, because you are loading each of these mics. It then has to run through and load all the samples from your hard disk, or in this case an SSD, so it's a bit quicker, but it does take a little while. These are fairly large libraries. This one alone is up to 1 gigabyte just for one mic. So now that's loaded up, we'll just play a similar phrase using the far mics. So you've got a bit of distance there. It sounds a lot further away. There's some kind of panning going on there where the mics, I'm assuming, were in the room quite a long way back and were picking up the choir from different angles. But it's a really nice mic for kind of those lush background filling choir tones. The close mics, again, do what they say on the tin. They're a closer recording. I'm not going to wait for this to load. I'm just going to start hitting some keys and see what happens. It should play quite nicely streaming off the SSD. So you can immediately hear that's a much closer mic. And then finally we've got the spot mics, which are over the top of each of the choir sections. And of course, if you've got the RAM and the time to load, you can join the spots, for instance, and the far together. So let's just reduce the spot a little bit and have some spot and far. And they're lovely phase synced. You don't get any problems with phasing or any delays or anything, and that loads really well. Obviously, this is a 1.5 gigabyte single patch now, but that includes all the phrases, so that's pretty good going. So we'll go back to the mid mics and we'll turn off the far and the spot. Underneath the reverb, we didn't look at the reverbs previously, but you've got an option between concert, dark, bright, theatre, medium hall, large chamber, large hall, church, cathedral, long church, cave, vocal dream, and warm ambience. And they're quite nice reverbs. If we choose the cathedral, for instance, choose the mid mics and lob it up to about 1/3 of the way up. It's got a 9-second tail on this one, so it's going to give you a really big vocal cathedral sound. And I just play the same old phrase again. And it's got a lovely tail on there. It's a fairly close recording, so if I put it all the way up, almost to the far right. There you can really hear the tail shining away there. So that's a really nice little built-in reverb there. We're just going to slide that back down again. So that's the Marcato phrasing. Again, you've got to really use your brain on this one and try and create your phrases so they sound the way you want them to sound. But there's a lot of really good options in there to get some really great sounding choirs using the Marcato. So finally we're going to move on to the Staccato. Many years ago, when I bought a different choir from a different manufacturer whose name will remain nameless, they had some really beautiful staccatos where you just kind of load up different vowels and it would just go zink, zonk, zink, zank, and it was really good fun to play, and you can create some ridiculous sounding choir phrases. That was great, but they were a little bit over the top in their sounding. This is a totally different ball game. Dominus Choir Pro uses some really good recordings for the staccato. They are both velocity and or mod wheel controllable, so you've got the same kind of controls as you do on the Marcato engine. You've also got control over the pre-roll latency, which is lovely when you've got those big rolling R's. You can really hear the rolling R's, and I'll play some of them in a second. You've also got the syllable speed selector, as you did on the Marcato, the 3 keyboard layouts, as you do before. You've got your mix selector and your word edit, which is very similar to that found in Marcato. But this time these are all true staccato recordings, so I'm going to stick my mod wheel up to F, and the first one in the list when you load this for the first time is Do, Mi, Mu, and so I'm just going to hit a few notes and you can hear the overlapped male and female choir staccato phrasing. Do, mi, mo. Do, mi, mo. Do, mi, mo. Do, mi. I just love that. It's great. Lovely sound, really nice in your face staccato, but it's also got that beautiful choral sound that you just don't get in some other libraries. So all of these are key switchable again. So for instance, on this default preset, you've got Do, Mi, Mu, and Desire, and A, Mi, Mo, and Ese, Chi, Do, and you can just choose between them. And if you really want to just go to town, you can choose one of these and just play. And it does exactly what you expect it to do. Every time you release a note and play the next note, it will automatically play the next syllable in the list of syllables. If you want to, you can just create a whole new one, and I'm going to select this to be F0. No, I won't. I'll select this to be F# 0, and you can go to your word edit, and you can just click randomly. I used to do this all the time in the previous choir I had, and you can just click around. There we are. Goodness only knows what that is actually saying, but now all you need to do is just hit the keyboard and play chords or play single tones, and you can get a really nice big choiry sound, which would fit in sometimes really nice with that kind of trailer music and the big battle scene type music. And it just sounds great. The dynamic range is really, really good on this. If you lower the mod wheel down to P, let's just go back to the engine window, down to P. You've got really good dynamic control there, which is fantastic to use. So you've got all the options, the words, the mixing, the engine for all 3. You've got some similar phrasing for all 3, so some of the vowels are consistent across all 3. And by using all 3 together, maybe on 3 separate tracks within your DAW, you can imagine that you can very easily create some staccato and marcato phrasings together, and then on top of that build in some nice gentle legato. I would have loved to have seen the whole lot in one great big gargantuan patch that allowed you to switch between legato, marcato and staccato in one single patch, but that would have been a monster both to program and to load. It would have been at least kind of 2 or 3 gigabytes to load a single patch, and I can see why they haven't done that. But between the 3 of them, you can get some really good choir sounds. It's a really beautiful library to play. You can pretty much play anything, and it just sounds lovely. And I think I've probably demonstrated that in this short demo. But it just is a beautiful library. It's well worth having a listen to, having a go at. And obviously, if you need a choir right now, this is a really good option for you. I think Fluffy Audio are going to do a discount for the first weeks or so, or month maybe, I don't know, of the release, which is soon. And this is a go-to library, I think, for choirs for the future.